Welcome to Golden Age Stories.
I want you to close your eyes for a second, unless you're driving, of course. If you're behind the wheel, please, just picture this vividly in your mind's eye, but keep your eyes on the road.
Right, safety first.
Yeah.
But really try to visualize this space.
Yeah, imagine a room, but not just like any room. I want you to picture a perfectly immaculate, just hyper-controlled space. We are talking about an environment where absolutely everything is mathematically precisely where it's supposed to be.
Like down to the millimeter.
Exactly. There isn't a single speck of dust on the heavy mahogany desk. You look over at the windows, and the thick velvet curtains don't just hang there. They are perfectly aligned. They're basically engineered to drape without a single crease out of place.
It's an environment of total absolute control.
Right. And standing right in the dead center of this pristine room is a man.
And you really have to imagine the man matching the room to an almost eerie degree.
That is the key. He's wearing this 1930s tuxedo. And to give you some context from the source material we're looking at today, it points out that this single piece of bespoke clothing costs more than an average family home at the time.
Wow. Yeah, that's just staggering wealth.
It is, and it's flawless. The lapels are, sharp enough to cut glass. And his face, he's sporting a mustache that isn't just groomed, it is waxed, trimmed, and so meticulously symmetrical it looks, a feat of structural engineering.
Right, it's completely deliberate.
Totally. For decades, when the American public looked at this man, they saw the absolute pinnacle of sophistication. They literally called him the best-dressed man in America. We are talking about the legendary Hollywood actor Adolphe Menjou.
The quintessential man in this suit. I mean, for an entire generation, he was the living, breathing epitome of golden age elegance.
Right. But here is the central mystery, the core paradox that we are going to unpack today on this deep dive. How does a man who is so universally beloved for his effortless, charming on-screen presence, how does he die as one of the most controversial, feared, and frankly hated figures in Hollywood history?
It's just a profound contradiction. The public, they only ever saw the silk ties and the effortless charm on the silver screen.
Exactly.
But what we're going to explore today is how that elegance was a carefully constructed facade. Behind the scenes, the effortlessness was a complete myth. He was operating on this system of rigid internal geometry.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how those perfectly tailored suits weren't just, a fashion statement. We are going to see how they functioned as a rigid suit of armor that over the decades slowly hardened and transformed into a weapon.
And we have a really fantastic source guiding our journey today. It's a script from an audio documentary that zeroes in on the life, the underlying psychology, and the deeply controversial career of Menjou.
Yeah, it's such a great roadmap.
It really is. It provides this brilliant analytical framework. We're going to trace his life all the way back to his origins on the incredibly gritty industrial streets of late 19th century Pittsburgh.
Far cry from Hollywood.
Oh, totally. We'll follow him from there to the horrifying battlefields of World War I in France, map out his ascent into a Hollywood icon, and then finally, we have to examine his highly polarizing role in the late 1940s Hollywood blacklist era.
Right, and before we get too deep into that timeline, I think it's worth laying out some ground rules for how we're approaching this, especially for you listening right now.
Good call. The context is crucial here.
Yeah, because when we reach the late 1940s, we are going to be touching on the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC hearings, and the subsequent Hollywood blacklist. The post-war era is just, it's a minefield of American politics.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people's lives were destroyed, ideological lines were drawn in the sand, and those debates are still incredibly raw today.
They really are. So our goal in this deep dive is absolutely not to litigate the Cold War.
If you are enjoying this journey into the Golden Age, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to keep telling true stories of Hollywood's greatest legends. Now, back to the story.
We aren't here to endorse or condemn the political actions of the left or the right during that era.
Right. Our objective is to impartially explore the narrative and the psychological analysis of Menjou exactly as it's presented in our source material.
Exactly. We are dissecting the psychology of the man, not putting the 1940s on trial. So let's jump right in. Because the first thing our source does is it basically takes a sledgehammer to the myth of Menjou's origins.
It really shatters that whole illusion.
It does, because when you see him on screen in those top hats and tails, walking with a silver-tipped cane, you naturally assume he was born into aristocracy. You picture him growing up in a Manhattan penthouse or, I don't know, summering on the French Riviera taking fencing lessons.
It's the natural assumption because his performance of immense wealth was just so incredibly convincing.
Right.
But the truth, presented in the source, is much, much grittier. He was not born into high society. He was born in 1890, and he's born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And I want you to really think about what 1890s Pittsburgh actually looked and felt like, because this is about as far from a Riviera villa as you can get on planet Earth.
It was intense.
We are talking about the absolute beating heart of the American Industrial Revolution. It was a city defined by unrelenting soot, blast furnaces, steel mills, and deafening constant noise.
The sky was literally dark with smoke at noon.
Yeah, just completely choked with it. And that incredibly harsh landscape is the crucible that actually forged the best-dressed man in America.
The contrast between his origins and his eventual persona is just so striking. And to understand the genesis of the mask he wore his entire life, we really have to look at his parents.
Right, let's talk about them.
So his father was a French immigrant who managed hotels and restaurants, and his mother was Irish. Young Adolphe didn't grow up lounging in country clubs.
No, not at all.
He grew up navigating these very specific high-stress environments of crowded dining rooms and bustling hotel lobbies.
This is where the source material gets so fascinating to me. It notes that in those environments, Adolphe wasn't just, a kid playing in the corner with his toys.
Right, he was working, or at least watching.
Exactly, he was observing, he was studying the ecosystem like a sociologist. Imagine being a kid sitting quietly in the back of a high-end French restaurant that your dad is running and just watching the power dynamics play out in real time, night after night.
He was absorbing the subtle currency of class. The source specifically mentions how he watched businessmen adjust their cuffs.
Which seems like such a tiny detail.
It does, but that isn't just a random movement. It's a subtle physical gesture designed to project power, authority, and ownership of a space.
Right, and then he would watch the waiters. He observed how a waiter would bow, fulfilling a subservient role, but doing it in a way that maintained their own dignity while serving people who were supposedly their social betters.
So he's sitting in the front row of a daily masterclass on human behavior and class structure.
He's seeing the strings attached to the puppets, basically.
Yeah. A masterclass is the perfect way to describe it. And the psychological synthesis he makes here is profound. This restaurant environment taught young Menjou that the concept of the gentleman wasn't some innate biological trait.
Right, it's not in your DNA.
Exactly.
Right.
It wasn't in your blood. It was a carefully constructed mask. It was a performance of status.
Yeah.
He learned very early on that you could completely manipulate how the world treated you simply by manipulating how you presented yourself physically.
He realizes that elegance is just a performance, right? A set of learned behaviors. But here is where I get a little stuck. Well, a lot of kids might realize that acting fancy gets you better treatment. But how does that basic childhood realization turn into the obsessive, almost terrifying discipline that defined the rest of his life?
That's the leap, yeah.
Right. How do you go from I should dress nicely to I am going to engineer my entire existence around absolute perfection?
Well, the source traces that exact transition directly to his education at the Culver Military Academy.
Okay, that makes sense.
If the restaurant taught him the theory of the mask, the military academy taught him the intense physical engineering required to wear it permanently.
Let's really dig into this. Because dropping a naturally observant, perfectionist kid into a turn-of-the-century military academy sounds like a recipe for a massive psychological shift.
Oh, without a doubt.
The documentary explicitly says that at Culver, a single loose thread on a uniform wasn't just viewed as a minor uniform violation. It was treated as a total failure of character.
And that right there is the pivotal moment. We have to consider how human beings internalize extreme discipline.
Right. It changes your wiring.
Exactly. At Culver, the external environment demanded absolute, unyielding perfection. Menjou didn't just comply with that demand, he internalized it completely.
So it wasn't just an act anymore?
No, for him, the suit ceased to be mere clothing. As the documentary notes, it became armor.
Armor against what, though? Like, against judgment?
Armor against failure, against vulnerability, against being seen as less than perfect. Think about it. If the military school tells you that a loose thread means a failure of character, then the inverse must also be true, right? A perfectly pressed uniform means an impregnable character.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
He was building a fortress around himself, stitch by stitch. He believed that if his exterior was utterly flawless, no one could ever question his internal worth.
And he takes that mindset and applies it to his higher education. He goes to Cornell University, but he doesn't go to study theater or the arts or anything like that.
No, not at all.
He goes to study engineering, which, honestly, when you think about his later acting career, suddenly makes terrifying sense.
It totally does. It solidified a mechanical, precise, mathematical way of thinking that would govern every single aspect of his life.
Right.
An engineer looks at a bridge and sees forces, load-bearing capacities, and structural integrity. Menjou began to look at himself, and eventually other people, through that exact same lens.
But all of this, I mean, the restaurant observations, the military academy discipline, the engineering degree, all of it was really just foundational preparation for the ultimate crucible.
Yes, the event that locked it all into place.
World War I.
Exactly.
The source details Menjou's time serving in the American Ambulance Corps in France during the First World War. And we really need to pause and establish the context here.
It's so important to understand the scale of it.
Right, because World War I wasn't just a war, it was the birth of mechanized slaughter. We are talking about artillery barrages that lasted for days, trenches filled with disease, mustard gas, and a level of chaotic violence the world had literally never seen before.
The psychological contrast here is incredibly stark. You take a man whose entire safety net, his whole sense of self-worth, is built on order, cleanliness, straight lines, and perfect tailoring.
Yeah.
And you drop him into the absolute chaos, the horrifying mud, and the unimaginable carnage of the Western Front.
Here is how I try to wrap my head around his reaction to that trauma. Imagine you are stranded in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane. Houses are being ripped apart, trees are flying through the air, the noise is deafening, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop the storm. You are completely powerless.
Right, total loss of control.
So what do? You find a paper napkin and you sit there in the middle of the storm trying to fold it into a mathematically perfect swan.
That is such a vivid way to put it.
You just, you focus all your remaining psychological energy on this one tiny microscopic element of your environment that you can still control.
That analogy captures the psychology perfectly. When the macro world is utterly messy, violent, and out of your control, you cling violently to the microelements.
Yeah, you have to.
The source states that seeing the world fall apart in the mud of France hardened something deep inside him. He couldn't control the artillery shells falling from the sky. He couldn't control the death and dismemberment around him.
But what could he control?
He could control his posture. He could control his speech. He could control his physical appearance.
So he used his extreme discipline as a literal survival mechanism. He maintained the mask of the sophisticated gentleman to keep from losing his mind in the madness of war.
Precisely. He presented a rigidly ordered version of himself to a world that was inherently messy and unpredictable. It was a psychological shield.
Wow.
By ensuring his uniform was as clean as possible under the circumstances, by maintaining his military bearing, he was basically telling the chaos, you cannot break me.
And how that survival mechanism transitioned from the battlefields of Europe to the ruthless streets of New York City is, it's just a fascinating evolution.
It really is, because the stakes just shift entirely.
Right, because after the war ends, he doesn't go back to engineering bridges. He heads to New York to try and make it as an actor. And the transition is seamless in its brutality.
He goes from dodging shrapnel in France to facing starvation in Manhattan.
Yeah, the source paints this incredibly vivid image, a real narrative anchor for his early struggles. Menjou is completely broke. He is literally wandering the streets of New York at night, sleeping on park benches because he cannot afford a room to sleep in.
But, and this is the detail that truly defines his character and his entire philosophy of life, even when he was starving and homeless. The documentary notes that he looked like a millionaire.
This detail from the source absolutely blew my mind. He would spend his last few cents, money he desperately needed for a meal, money that could have bought him bread, to have his one decent suit perfectly pressed and his shoes immaculately shined.
It seems totally irrational until you understand his worldview.
Right.
This unpacks a rather dark, cynical, psychological truth that Menjou had realized about society. Society at large doesn't really care who you are on the inside.
It really doesn't.
It doesn't care about your potential or your soul. It cares who you look like on the outside.
It's the old adage, dress for the job you want, but taken to an absolute life or death extreme.
Exactly. He was disciplined enough to literally starve inside a perfectly tailored coat. He understood the economics of perception.
Yeah, if you look the part, people believe you are the part.
If he looked like a vagrant, if he let his appearance match his financial reality, society would treat him like a vagrant, and his ambition would be dead.
Right, no theater producer is going to cast a guy who looks like he sleeps on a park bench.
Exactly. But if he looked like a sophisticated, wealthy gentleman, the world would eventually have to treat him like one. He was, as the documentary puts it, waiting for the world to catch up to his ambition.
He was bluffing the entire city of New York with a pressed lapel and a shined shoe. And, eventually the bluff worked.
It did. The world did catch up.
Hollywood came calling. But to really appreciate the impact of his arrival in California, we have to talk about what Hollywood was actually like in the early 1920s.
Oh, it was a totally different world back then.
Because I think a lot of people picture modern Hollywood, slick, corporate, highly polished studio machines.
The reality of 1920s Hollywood was vastly different. The source describes it as a chaotic frontier. Los Angeles was still largely agricultural.
Right, dirt roads and orange groves.
Exactly. The studios were often literally just open-air stages built on dirt lots. It was an era of wild, unregulated money, frantic slapstick comedy, and actors who were often as rough and unpolished as the dusty towns they were filming in.
Just a messy, loud, highly undisciplined environment where people were making up the rules of filmmaking as they went along.
Totally.
And then into this dusty, chaotic frontier steps Adolphe Menjou. The documentary says he didn't just walk onto a movie set, he invaded it.
That's a great word for it, invaded.
He invaded it with a level of terrifying professionalism that most of these people had never seen before.
Because he was the complete antithesis of the silent era star. He wasn't some bohemian artist waiting for inspiration.
Right.
He was a Cornell-trained engineer in a bespoke suit. And his massive breakthrough in 1923 highlights this contrast perfectly. He was cast by Charlie Chaplin in a film called A Woman of Paris.
Which is such an interesting collision of worlds, because Chaplin is like the undisputed king of frantic slapstick. He's the little tramp with the baggy, ill-fitting pants, the floppy shoes, and the chaotic physical comedy.
Chaplin was a genius, though, and he recognized that for A Woman of Paris, which was a dramatic film he was directing, he needed someone to play the exact opposite of the tramp persona. He needed an actor to embody the ultimate, refined, sophisticated man of the world. Someone who exuded wealth and control effortlessly.
And Menjou delivered something that was genuinely revolutionary for the time. Let's really break down the acting style of the early 1920s because it's so different from today.
It really was night and day.
Silent era acting was, by necessity, huge. Since you didn't have spoken dialogue to convey exposition or emotion, you had to communicate everything with your whole body.
Right, you had to project it all visually.
It was wild, flailing gestures, massive facial expressions, eye rolling, chest heaving. You had to physically pantomime every single feeling so the audience in the back row could understand what was happening.
And Menjou completely rejected all of that.
Yes.
The documentary notes that when A Woman of Paris premiered, the industry actually gasped at his performance. They'd never seen acting quite like this on screen before. It was incredibly restrained, it was cold, it was minute.
It was engineered. That's the word the source uses, and it makes so much sense given his background. Engineered.
Perfect description.
He realized that the camera lens magnified everything. He could convey 1,000 words of dialogue just by raising a single perfectly groomed eyebrow a fraction of an inch.
He didn't try to feel his way through a scene emotionally like a method actor. He calculated it.
Yeah.
He used his understanding of mechanics to construct a physical performance.
And the level to which that engineering was tied to his physical appearance is just staggering.
It's almost hard to believe.
The source elaborates on his wardrobe, which became legendary in Hollywood. He reportedly owned over 100 bespoke suits, dozens of custom-made walking sticks, and hundreds of pairs of shoes.
It's a massive collection.
I have to admit, when I first read that, it's really easy to dismiss it as just, massive ego or vanity. Okay, the guy got rich and he just really loves shopping. He likes looking in the mirror.
That is the surface-level assumption, and it's a fair one to make.
Right.
But the source makes it abundantly clear that for Menjou, this massive wardrobe wasn't about vanity at all. It wasn't about looking pretty.
No.
No, these clothes were the literal physical skeleton of the characters he was building. He truly believed that if the tailoring on his suit was off by a fraction of an inch, the physical geometry of his posture would be wrong.
Wow.
and therefore the entire performance would be a lie.
Because the mask wouldn't be perfect, and if the mask has a crack in it, the illusion of total control shatters.
Exactly.
There is a quote from Menjou in the documentary that just perfectly encapsulates his entire worldview, and it really separates him from his peers. He famously said, "I am not an actor, I am a businessman who acts."
That is such a revealing statement about his psychology. In the middle of the Hollywood dream factory, surrounded by bohemian artists waiting for the muse to strike, Menjou was the ultimate cold realist.
Yeah, completely pragmatic.
He treated the chaotic film studio not as an artistic playground, but as a high-stakes corporate boardroom. He was never late. He never missed a line.
Always perfectly calibrated.
Right. He treated a film set like a structural stress test, expecting every component to function flawlessly.
And he applied his engineering background to the literal physical mechanics of filmmaking. The source mentions how he would walk onto a set and calculate the angles of his face against the studio lighting grid.
He was basically doing match while acting.
Yes. He knew exactly how the specific weave of the silk on his lapel would reflect the key light into the camera lens. While everyone else was trying to, summon up peers or emote, he was doing geometry.
And we cannot understate how brilliantly it worked. By 1931, this intense mathematical calculation earned him an Academy Award nomination for the film The Front Page.
It's huge.
He had reached the absolute peak of his profession. He was the highest paid supporting actor in the business.
Incredible.
His influence was so massive that the source points out every high-end tailor in London and New York looked to him to dictate the next trend in men's fashion.
He had won. I mean, the guy who was starving on a park bench in New York had conquered the entire Hollywood machine using nothing but absolute discipline and a perfect suit.
It's an incredible success story on paper.
It is, and this is where the narrative takes a very sharp, very dark turn. Because we have to ask, what does all this rigid control actually do to a human being over the long term?
It takes a toll, a heavy one.
The source argues that by the time we get into the 1940s, this exact same perfectionism, the very thing that saved his sanity in World War I, the very thing that made him a millionaire, was turning into a psychological time bomb.
The documentary notes a critical shift here. His discipline, which had previously been focused inward on his own performance and appearance, started to manifest outward.
Oh, that's dangerous.
It became a total intolerance for anyone else who didn't see the world exactly his way.
Which brings us to a time of massive global and political upheaval. We are moving into the late 1940s, the post-war era.
Very tense time.
Very. The Cold War is beginning to freeze over. The world, politically speaking, is getting incredibly messy, ambiguous, and frightening again. And Menjou's intense intolerance for messiness mutates.
It really does.
It goes from being a professional quirk like, getting annoyed if a fellow actor forgets a line or misses a mark, to becoming a severe, unforgiving moral philosophy.
The source argues that Menjou fundamentally believed there was a right way to live and a wrong way. A right way to think and a wrong way.
Very black and white.
Completely binary. He lived his entire life in a world of straight lines, sharp creases, and predictable mechanics. But the world, especially the geopolitical world of the late 1940s, isn't a controlled movie set.
No, you cannot dictate the lighting, and you certainly cannot control the ideological beliefs of the people around you.
Which brings us to the 1947 HUAC hearings.
Right, the House Un-American Activities Committee. Now, for anyone who might be rusty on their mid-century history, HUAC was a congressional committee that began aggressively investigating allegations of communist infiltration in the United States.
And they focused very heavily on the Hollywood film industry.
They did. They believed movies were being used to subvert American values.
And the mechanics of this investigation were terrifying for those involved. Being subpoenaed by HUAC meant you were forced to testify before Congress.
Under oath, in front of the cameras.
Exactly. You were asked about your political affiliations, and more destructively, you were heavily pressured to name names.
That was the really brutal part.
To accuse your colleagues, writers, directors, and fellow actors of being communists or sympathizers.
And if you refused to name names, or if you were suspected of having the wrong political leanings, you were placed on the Hollywood blacklist.
Which was a death sentence for your career.
Let's be clear about what the blacklist meant practically. It wasn't just a bad reputation. It was a complete industry-wide ban on your employment.
The studio bosses colluded to ensure you could not get a job anywhere.
It destroyed careers, it ruined finances, and it drove people out of the country or into deep despair. The source describes how most actors and writers reacted to these hearings. They were terrified.
Understandably so.
They hid, they trembled. It was an atmosphere of immense paranoia and fear.
But not Adolphe Menjou.
No, not him.
The documentary paints this incredible visual contrast. While everyone else is cowering and trying to avoid the spotlight, Menjou walks into the congressional hearing room, adjusts his perfect silk tie, and acts like he's taking command of the room.
Wow.
He didn't go in there as a reluctant, terrified witness. He went in as a willing, eager crusader.
The source notes that he didn't just answer the questions he was asked. He actively pointed fingers at people he deemed subversives.
He was volunteering names.
He actively called for their total erasure from the industry. He became a leading vocal figure in a right-wing organization called the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals.
And through this group, he worked tirelessly.
Using his influence.
Yes,
Well,
using his influence to ensure that writers, directors, and fellow actors were permanently blacklisted.
He was actively working to destroy the livelihoods of the very people he had shared sound stages with for decades. He was purging the industry.
He really was.
And this leads to what is, for me, the absolute crux of this entire deep dive. It is the moment that truly tests our understanding of his psychology.
It's an unforgettable detail.
It's an anecdote from the source that is genuinely chilling. It's known as the parachute story.
It is the ultimate distillation of his psychological state during this era.
Okay, I want to set the scene for this story. During this period of intense political fever, Menjou is being interviewed, and he is asked a hypothetical question designed to gauge just how committed he is to his anti-communist crusade.
A thought experiment, basically.
Exactly. He's asked what he would do if he were on an airplane that was actively crashing. There is only one parachute left on the plane, and the only other person on the plane with him is a known communist.
And the source notes that without a single second of hesitation, without even a flicker of doubt or moral calculus, Menjou replies that he would take the parachute for himself. Let the other man go down with the plane.
I really have to stop and push back on this because I am trying to wrap my head around the sheer coldness of that answer.
It's brutal.
I understand being rigid, I understand having fierce political disagreements, but we are talking about a man who has spent his entire adult life studying human nuance.
Right.
A man who makes his living observing the tiny, subtle details of human behavior. A man of immense wealth, culture, and supposedly refined, gentlemanly manners.
The epitome of class.
How does he lose his basic human empathy so completely? How do you hypothetically look another human being in the eye on a crashing plane and confidently say, I am taking the chute, you can die? Is it just pure psychopathy?
Well, it sounds like psychopathy on the surface, but the source's analysis provides a deeply unsettling and arguably more tragic answer.
Okay, what is it?
The documentary connects this absolute lack of empathy directly back to his Cornell engineering mindset and the unresolved trauma of World War I.
Bringing it all back together.
Exactly. To Menjou, by the late 1940s, people were no longer complex, breathing human beings with families and nuanced internal lives. They had become components in a machine.
Components, you mean like gears and cogs?
Exactly like that. Think about how a structural engineer views a massive piece of machinery.
Right.
If a part of the machine is functioning correctly, doing its job according to the design, it stays. But if a part is broken, or if it doesn't fit the required straight lines for the machine to run perfectly, what do?
You take it out.
You don't sympathize with the broken gear. You don't try to understand why the gear bent out of shape. You simply discard it. You throw it away and replace it so the machine can continue to function.
Wow. So in his mind, he viewed human complexity, differing political opinions, any kind of ideological messiness or deviation from his strict code. He viewed all of that as a literal broken part in the machine of America.
Yes. The source argues that he didn't see taking the parachute as a human tragedy or an act of murder. He saw it as the necessary, logical removal of an enemy component that was threatening the order of his machine.
That is just chilling.
It was the exact same rigid mindset he applied to a loose thread on his suit at military academy. If a thread is loose, you violently pull it out. If a colleague is ideologically misaligned, you erase them from the industry.
There is no room for grace, only structural integrity.
Exactly.
That is terrifying, because it shows that the discipline wasn't just a professional tool anymore. The armor had completely fused to his skin and consumed him.
And eventually, you can't live with that much internal tension without something giving way.
Something has to snap.
This extreme rigidity eventually caused the mask to crack. The bespoke tailoring finally split at the seams, and everyone saw the unyielding machinery underneath.
And the documentary gives us a perfect late-career anecdote that proves this, right? The 1957 filming of the anti-war masterpiece Paths of Glory.
This is a fascinating historical collision of personalities, because Paths of Glory was directed by Stanley Kubrick. And anyone who knows even a little bit about film history knows that Kubrick was famously obsessive.
Oh, extremely.
He was a notorious disciplinarian who demanded absolute, exhausting perfection from everyone on his sets, often doing dozens and dozens of takes until he got exactly what he wanted.
So you have Kubrick, an immovable object of directorial discipline, clashing with Menjou, an unstoppable force of rigid, engineered acting.
It's a recipe for disaster.
And the source details how, under the pressure of Kubrick's demands, Menjou finally explodes. The perfectly composed, meticulously tailored gentleman absolutely loses his mind on set in front of the cast and crew.
He just totally snaps.
He screams at Kubrick, hurling a string of obscenities that the documentary says, quote, would make a sailor blush.
And the significance of that explosion is profound.
Because it shows who he really is.
Yes. It proves that the gentlemanly exterior we discussed earlier, the studied cuffs, the polite bows, the tailored suits, the soft-spoken charm, was indeed just a mask he had learned in his father's restaurant.
The illusion was broken.
By 1957, under the weight of his own hardened worldview, the mask was slipping. He'd spent his entire life perfecting the image of a gentleman, but he had entirely lost the forgiving grace, the patience, and the empathy that are actually required to be one.
He mastered the aesthetic of a gentleman, but sacrificed the soul of one to get there.
That's a very poignant way to put it.
And that brings us to the tragedy of his legacy, which the source synthesizes so well as we start to look at the broader implications of his life.
It is a profoundly paradoxical legacy to leave behind.
Definitely.
On one hand, you have a man who is undeniably a master architect of cinematic craft. As the documentary summarizes, he taught early Hollywood the immense power of the small moment.
Right, he shifted the whole paradigm.
He introduced a restrained, intelligent realism that moved film acting away from broad slapstick pantomime and into subtle, engineered psychological performance.
He showed an entire industry that less is more as long as the less is perfectly calculated. He essentially modernized screen acting.
He did. He truly did. But on the other hand, he exists historically as the grim ghost of the blacklist.
Yeah, that shadow hangs over everything.
He is remembered by many as a man whose polished exterior hid a heart that had hardened into stone. A man who chose his rigid, uncompromising code over his own community and colleagues.
The source notes he died in 1963, leaving behind a massive filmography of over 100 films. But the way the documentary describes his ending is somewhat pathetic, isn't it?
It is. It describes him in his final years as a man out of time.
Think about the cultural shift happening in the early 1960s. The studio system golden age was dead.
The world was changing rapidly.
The 60s counterculture had arrived, an era defined by gritty realism, rebellion, method acting like Marlon Brando, and deliberate, unapologetic messiness.
And Menjou simply didn't fit into that world.
No, the world simply no longer cared about his perfectly waxed mustache or his razor-sharp trouser creases. His aesthetic had become obsolete, and his personal reputation was permanently stained by his political ruthlessness.
He built a fortress out of fashion and rigid discipline, as the source eloquently puts it. And he lived inside that fortress until the very end.
Just
Waiting for an applause for his perfection that was no longer coming. The culture had moved on and left him barricaded inside his own immaculate room.
So, bringing this all back to you, listening right now, this deep dive forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question about how we define concepts like professionalism, elegance, and character today.
It's a very relevant question.
When we look at someone and call them a consummate professional or a true gentleman, what do we actually mean by that? Is it just about knowing how to dress perfectly, showing up exactly on time, and executing your job flawlessly without a hair out of place?
Right, is it just surface level?
Or does true professionalism, and more importantly, true humanity, require the grace and the patience to handle the messy, unpredictable flaws in the people around us?
Menjou ultimately chose the predictable order of the machine over the chaotic messiness of humanity.
He did.
And the source heavily suggests that in making that choice, in demanding that everything operate like clockwork, he became significantly less human himself.
Which leaves me with a final thought I want you to mull over, something that really builds on everything our source laid out today.
Okay, lay it on us.
If we accept the premise that Menjou's incredibly rigid discipline, his flawless outward appearance, and his absolute refusal to tolerate any ideological or physical messiness were actually just trauma responses.
Which the source strongly implies.
Right. If it was all just a desperate reaction to the chaos of World War I and poverty, cleverly disguised as high sophistication, then what cracks are we trying to hide?
Oh, wow. That's a big question.
When we demand absolute perfection from ourselves, and more importantly, when we become deeply intolerant and demand absolute perfection from the people around us, what internal chaos are we trying to desperately cover up with our own modern versions of tailored suits?
It's a very profound point to consider. The relentless pursuit of perfection, whether in our careers or our personal lives, is very often just a socially acceptable mask for a deep-seated fear of losing control.
Exactly. So the next time you picture that immaculate room we started with, the mahogany desk without a single speck of dust, the heavy velvet curtains perfectly aligned, and the man standing in the center whose tuxedo costs more than a house.
Don't just admire the silk ties.
Look closer. Look at the rigidity. And ask yourself what all that perfection is desperately trying to hide